Okay, well, it is time to get going. Continuing on with the Rooted series, looking at some Christian apologetics type stuff. Thanks for being here on a hot Christmas Eve. It is unacceptable, the temperature. But we're going to continue on doing this. So here's the question of the day. I'm sure that probably in discussions you've had with people throughout your life, religious discussions, you've had somebody say something along the line of, well, where did God come from? If God created the whole universe, where did God come from? What has been your response to that?
I'm the one asking the question to Mom when I was
Okay.
so,
What was your answer?
just he's always been there.
He's always been there? God's always been there?
I'm like, but how? Where? Like, I'm the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
I mean, in the Bible Belt, we just don't, or at least me, haven't really come across that. Now, I have polytheist friends, but they've never questioned me about where my God comes from.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's never been a question in the Bible Belt that I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting. So there's a lot of people just location-wise that aren't asking this question because we're such a heavily theistic, if you want to use that word, heavily religioned part of the world that there's a lot of people who may not have been asking this, especially in earlier generations. Increasingly, though, like people ask this question a lot on the internet, and I'm sure your kids are going to be hearing people asking this question. Sometimes it's asked rhetorically. It's kind of a gotcha card because they think you might not have a good answer. But how do you answer this question, though? You know, you are talking to somebody. Maybe you haven't had that experience before, but somebody does come up to you and ask this question. Where does God come from? How do you answer? Yeah, where does God come from?
See, now I can't even stop and think about that very long because then I start to
Yeah.
have a lot of doubts and I'm just like, I don't even want to go there.
Yeah.
It's just...
Even Lauren cannot consider. Yeah. Yeah, so this is part of what we're talking about today. And this question in particular is going to be a big part of what we're going to talk about. Where does anything come from? And that seems like a weird question, but it's a good question to ask because everything comes from something. We'll talk about how to answer the where does God come from question. I think it's got a fairly simple answer in that you're just not understanding who God is if you're asking that question. But we'll talk about that. So some of the things that we've talked about so far. We talked about truth. There are some things that are true, some things that are not true. We talked about having rational beliefs, not just beliefs that you have because they've just been told to you by somebody else, but having beliefs that you have personally spent time looking at and understanding. You can know truths, you can know things through sometimes direct observation, sometimes through indirect means. And then we can know God, we talked about this last week, because of just the kind of being that God would be. We talked about the ontological argument, or the being argument. What is God like? We talked about that. And then also last week we talked about the moral argument, which is if there is any moral standards, there must be a moral lawgiver. And so if goodness or evil exists, there must be a source from which that comes from, which would be God. This is the four big arguments that we're going to be looking at. We looked at being and moral at the end there. You got BOOM as your acronym. Today we're going to look at the origin here. So the big takeaway from last week, the being. If God exists, He's an ultimate being in all His attributes. He's the extreme of everything that He is. He's the extreme of power. He's the extreme of knowledge. He's the extreme of goodness, whatever it is. God does exist, and he is an infinite being. We got, the camera just decided to switch and look at you, John. It's back to me. So, God does exist, and so then we talked about origins, what we're talking about today, order we'll talk about next week, and then moral. If moral laws exist, there's a moral law giver. Moral laws do exist, and so they must come from God. Every cause has an effect, and this is the whole crux of this issue of the origin of all things. Every cause has an effect, and every effect has a cause. We talked about this with a whole lot of different examples over the past couple weeks. The example we've used a couple of times is if you see some ripples on the lake, you know that something caused those ripples. Maybe it's the wind, maybe it's somebody threw a rock in, maybe it's a duck taken off or whatever it might be. Something caused the effect of the ripples. We just watched Home Alone, which is the greatest Christmas movie. And Home Alone is nothing but like Rube Goldberg machines, right? What's one of the examples? He steps down, the nail goes through his foot, he is in pain. There's a cause and effect for every one of those things. And we just naturally understand this. Every effect that we see, and we see a lot of effects in this world, has a lot of causes. That's kind of the whole medicine thing, right? You have all these symptoms, and you got a sore throat, and you got a cough, and you got whatever it might be. You got a fever. Well, there's something that is causing the fever. An immune response to some bacteria or some virus or something like that. And so a lot of what medicine is treating causes that are manifesting in these different effects, these symptoms. And so this is just a universal law. And it's not controversial. Everybody agrees with this cause and effect. It's really, really basic. And so the argument goes, everything that has a beginning has a cause that brought it into being. If something begins to exist, there's a reason why that thing has began to exist. And so all of us were born into the world, right? There's a reason why we exist. It's because our parents made us. All of us have reasons for existing. A picture on the wall exists because somebody painted that picture or somebody took that picture. Every effect that you see has everything that has had a beginning point, has had something that has brought it into being, into existence. And so it is, in effect, an effect. The universe has a beginning. And this has not always been the scientific view. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it is, essentially now the universal view, even among scientists. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And that cause would have to be something outside of the universe, which would be God. So, when you think about the beginnings of the universe, something has to be eternal. And this is you just can't really get around this. So for a very long time, well, let me preface this. What does eternal mean? Just the word eternal.
No beginning and no end.
Yeah, just is, no beginning, no end, something that hasn't had a start, doesn't have a finish, just is. So in the past, most people, up until really Einstein, most people believe that the universe was eternal. And the term that you'll read is like a steady state. That, the stars have always existed, and they just always will exist, and they will never not exist, and they always existed in the past, and they never had a beginning, and all that. That was the traditional view of most everybody, excluding, what the Bible has taught about these sorts of things. But the scientific consensus was the steady state view, that everything, that the universe, matter, was just eternal, and it never had a beginning. So Albert Einstein comes on the scene in the early 20th century, and he does his whole theory of relativity and all that kind of stuff, and it's way beyond my pay grade, and I don't understand it. But the crux of what he discovered was that all of these things, matter, time, and space, are interdependent. And I don't quite understand all the whatnot, but they're all tied together. And he's really not happy about this, because what that means is that the universe had a beginning when you take it to its end. And so Einstein was a self-described pantheist, and so he believed that the universe is God, and this theory that he comes up with really supported the existence of a God, and he was really not happy about it, because it was not something that he wanted, and so he fudged numbers, and there's a whole kind of thing. But anyway, today, pretty much every secular scientist, whoever you're going to come across, is going to believe some version of the Big Bang Theory, some version of events that led to the creation of the universe. And what that might be might have some slight variation, but this is pretty much universally accepted now today by every secular person in existence, essentially. And so they all say that the universe did have a beginning, which is kind of an issue when we think about cause and effect here. So there's several different laws. In the book we're using, just kind of base this whole class off of, is called "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist" by Turek and Frank Turek and Norm Geisler. That's what it is. It's a really good book if you want to read it. They flesh all this out in way more detail than I'm going to. But we talk about some reasons, proofs that the universe has a beginning, and from even a secular perspective that they would all agree with. The second law of thermodynamics is the law of entropy. Anybody, what is entropy? This is going back to high school science class, right? Entropy is, things tending towards disorder, right? If you leave stuff long enough, it just falls apart. If you leave some iron outside, it's going to rust and decay and just kind of fall apart. If you have a car and you put gas in your car and you drive, then your tank is going to run out of energy, and there's not going to be, unless you actively refill it with energy, it's just going to die. You put batteries in a flashlight and you turn it on. Eventually, it's going to get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer until it's out of power. You spend forever and a half, and this is just like a universal rule here. You spend forever and a half cleaning your house, and you've got company coming, and your house is all nice and clean. And within a state of 25 seconds, your house is filthy again, especially if you have a toddler. Things that are ordered and, things that have energy put into them, eventually that energy dissipates and the order collapses. Does that make sense? So when you think about the universe then, everything has energy. There's a lot of energy in the universe. The sun has energy. You have energy in your bodies. The problem is, if the universe is eternal and energy is expended, then the universe would be running out of energy. And so that's an issue. And you see order, and we'll talk about order next week some, but you see order, and over time you should see disorder. And so how could there be order coming from, you got some issues there. Anyway, won't spend too much time on this. Things tend towards chaos, universe is running out of energy. You have a lot of scientific observations that the universe is expanding. Hubble, the guy who the Hubble telescope is named after, discovered that the universe is expanding and getting bigger and bigger. And from that, scientists have reasoned that it must have all expanded from a single point, because when things explode, they expand, they go outwards. And so trace that all into a single point, and that's a big part of where whole Big Bang Theory, all that comes from. They would say that everything that exists, space, matter, time, we're all in a singularity, in a place with no space, no time, no matter. All of it's just so tightly condensed. And then it explodes, and then you have now something that has come from nothing, is essentially what it gets boiled down to. You have Einstein, who comes around, and his whole relativity. He proves that time, space, matter are all interdependent on each other, which you can't have one without the other. And so you can't have space if there's no matter, and you can't have matter if there's no time, and all these things are interdependent and all of that. And so from all of these and lots of other arguments, essentially the universal consensus, even in secular world, especially in the secular world, is that the universe had a beginning. And they, of course, posit the Big Bang, and they'll say that there was nothing, and then suddenly all of this happened. All of these things came into being spontaneously, and that's how all of us got here, just a really, really long time ago. So, how did the universe begin? I think that's a good question. There's some alignments that you see here, I think. It had to have begun suddenly. You can't have gradual existence coming into being. It has to be something that happened suddenly and quickly. That's why you have the whole Big Bang theory, not the gradual fizzle theory or whatever it might be. But you also see that in Genesis. In Genesis 1:1, what happens? How is creation described? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? And God speaks and these things happen. There's an immediacy to creation. That's interesting. How do these things happen, though? Because if anything that has come into being is an effect, then it has to have a cause. You come into some issues when you talk about the Big Bang, mostly because the laws of nature can't exist before the Big Bang. But what people are saying who support the Big Bang is that the Big Bang is plays by natural laws. And it gets down to the point where almost everybody has to say there's something supernatural that happens. And supernatural just means outside of nature, above nature. The question is then, what is the supernatural event that happened? What is the supernatural thing? It's not matter, right? Matter can't exist outside nature because matter is part of nature. And it can't be time because time can't exist outside of nature because time is a part of what nature is. And it can't be space for the same reasons. And so you get to a point where you have to almost just throw up your hands if you're just seeking a purely naturalistic explanation for the world. And there's a lot of scientists out there that have acknowledged that a pure materialistic worldview is impossible. And it's an increasingly commonly accepted that they may not say that there's a God who created the universe, but they are very open that the universe as we understand it, all the physics and all that stuff, it just doesn't explain what we're seeing. There has to be some kind of supernatural event here, or supernatural entity at work. And so many have tried to find some workarounds, and they've done that in a whole bunch of different ways. There's some who have rejected causality, like the law of cause and effect. But then you got a problem with, just inconsistency. If you reject cause and effect, then there goes all of science out the window. It seems like most of what I've read from people, they just say that the Big Bang is just kind of an exception. And so It's the one miracle, right, that all these things came into being. And I think part of the problem is for a lot of people in our world. We live in a really secularized world that's becoming increasingly secular. I think the real significant challenge we have is fighting against religion or science as a religion. And I think for a lot of people, they've accepted that a naturalistic worldview and have become almost religious towards their beliefs in science or whatever it might be, because you end up in these difficult positions. Anyway, all of that's really kind of dense and probably not super well explained, but you have some common objectives. Objections here, objectives. So a common objection that you sometimes see, this who made God question. When you talk about, well, if you were to say God created the world, they would say, well, the universe always existed. Well, they probably don't say that too much anymore. They will say that, the universe existed by the Big Bang, and you just back up the question, well, where did that come from? Where did the singularity come from? Where did all this energy, all the time, and all the space, and all the matter, where did all that come from? Well, you end up kind of stumped. Something has to be eternal. And the question, well, who made God, is not a question that makes a lot of sense when you understand the kind of God that we're talking about. God has no beginning. God has no end. We looked at these verses earlier. I think it's Revelation chapter 1. Flip over there real quick. Revelation chapter 1. You look at verse 8, and here you have, I am the Alpha, the Omega, says the Lord, who is, who was, who is to come, the Almighty. The claim that the Bible makes about who God is God himself is an eternal God. He is, God is spirit, right? You must worship him in spirit and truth. He's not a physical entity. He is by nature something that's outside of our laws of nature, outside of this materialistic world. And so he's eternal, and he's not created. He's outside of nature. And so the question, who made God, is coming from a totally mismatched worldview. It's coming probably from somebody who has a very materialistic worldview and assume that God, or your view of God, is as some kind of material God. So there's just kind of a definitional mismatch here. And so when people ask that question, I think the answer needs to be, well, God's eternal. He doesn't have a beginning. Because if he did, then he wouldn't be God. We talked about that a little bit last week. The type of being that God has to be if he exists is a being who's ultimate in all his attributes. In his existence, he has no beginning. He has no end. In his power, he has no limit. He can do all that can be done. That's the kind of God that we're talking about. There's a lot of gods out there in a lot of different religions that are not those kind of gods because they are limited and they do have beginnings. And you look at some of the pantheistic gods of the past, you look at like the Greek myths and all that kind of thing. Zeus had a beginning, right? He's got parents, and you can talk about how he was eaten by his dad, Kronos, and he had to fight his way out of his, well, I don't think he got eaten, but all his brothers and sisters did, and he split his dad's belly open, and all kinds of weird stuff. But there's a lot of gods out there in the, world of paganism and all that, and those gods have beginnings. That's not the claim that we make for what I would say is the true God. The true God would, by definition, have to have no beginning, have to be eternal. So there's just a mishmash there.
In the New King James, it literally, the verse you read, it doesn't say it in the ESV, but it literally says the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, and the end.
Yeah.
And the other ESV.
Yeah, the beginning and the end. So does all that make, I know that's kind of dense, and that's a little bit, outside my pay grade too. But any thoughts or questions about that before we move on to some other objections?
I mean, most people who would be questioning God and trying to say God can't exist would be
Yeah.
trying to defend the singularity, but it's the same argument goes both ways.
Yeah.
Where did all this space-time matter come from?
Yeah.
Like before it banged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the answer that they would give to a purely materialistic worldview is, well, it just kind of broke the laws of nature and it just happened, right? Or all of those things are eternal. But then you got the problem of, well, they very clearly have had a beginning, which is all these other things we're talking about. And so some people have said, well, there's endless big bangs. It just big bangs, and then it collapses into big bangs, and then it collapses. But then you just have all sorts of other issues. You're just putting the issue off over and over and over again. And so the issue remains, something has to be eternal. If all that we see came into being, and everybody says that it does, the question is just, well, what brought it into being? Was it just a fluke, a single miracle of, within the natural world, or was it, a supernatural being which caused it? And the question applies both ways. Our answer is, well, God is the eternal one. It's not matter that's eternal, it's God that's eternal. And He's uncreated. And He's the one who's outside of nature that caused all these things to exist. Another common objection that you get is, well, the universe it caused itself. And this is what we were just talking about. How did the universe exist before it existed? Nothing can cause itself to come into being, right? Everybody loves the I'm My Own Grandpa song. It is just stupid, right? Because the idea of being your own grandpa is just completely contradictory. It's a literal impossibility. You cannot be your own grandpa. Everyone has, parents, and there's parents have parents, and you can't exist before you exist to bring yourself into being. That's just not how things work. And yet that's the argument that's very often made. The universe brought itself into being. Nothing has ever brought itself into being. That would be a supernatural event if that were to happen. And so, no child ever gave birth to themselves, and, whatever illustration you want to use. But that's a very commonly made argument. And then science proves the Big Bang. There's a lot of people that say this. Science can't explain why it happened, even if it did happen, and it's big if. And that why is really significant. And that why is what we've been talking about here a lot. I don't think the Big Bang happened like most people would be saying that it happened. I think God created the universe like described in Genesis. But even if you want to say, sure, just for sake of argument, it happened. Why? And that why is what we've been talking about. There has to have been something that has caused this effect to happen.
Which still would say, you could be like, okay, the Big Bang happened, God caused the Big Bang.
Yeah, sure.
I'll give you that.
Yeah.
Be like, if that's how, maybe he did just Big Bang it, but
Yeah.
it was from the Lord.
Yeah. And so you have some issues with this purely materialistic worldview that a lot of people have. I think it's becoming less common. I really do. There's been a lot of pretty well-known scientists and people like that that have come out and basically said, well, we got to do something different because this argument just doesn't quite work. So let's talk for the little bit of time we got left. What does the Bible actually teach about creation? And what does the existence of anything tell us about God? So flip over to Genesis chapter 1. Somebody turn and look at Genesis 1 through 3 for me.
Can you read it?
Sure.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Yeah, so in Genesis you have God creates, God speaks, and whatever creation happens, there's immediacy there, there's intentionality there, there's a lot of interesting things. The Bible is really clear that God is the cause of creation. Everything had a beginning. People had a beginning. The earth had a beginning. All the plants had a beginning. There's talk about the angels having a beginning. God alone is eternal. Definitionally, we talked about this last week. And whatever God is alone at the pinnacle of existence. And so the devil is not an eternal being. Only God is eternal. There might be an immortality side of things of never dying, but we are all finite to some degree. God alone is infinite and eternal. And so the Bible's pretty clear that God is the cause of creation. I think it's really interesting when you look that in the act of creation, all three persons of the Trinity are involved. And you get that in Genesis chapter 1, right? You get at least two of these persons. Who do you have in Genesis 1? And what are they doing? In the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. You have God speaking here. You have the Holy Spirit, hovering over the face of the deep. Not quite sure what that means. The Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. I think you have all three active. Read also, flip over in John chapter 1, look at verses 1 through 3. John 1, 1 through 3. This is a really significant whole chapter. I go to this chapter a lot because there's just a lot in here. But in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Him, and without Him not anything was made that was made. And so what is this Word? Verse 14, the Word became flesh, dwelt among us. We have seen His glory, glory of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And so you have, even in that creation account, you have the one speaking, the Father, the speaking, the act of creation, the Word, the Son, through whom all things are made. And then you have, of course, the Holy Spirit that's present there. I think often we don't associate creation as being tied to Jesus, the Son, but it's pretty clearly is here in John. Also, look over in Colossians chapter 1. Look at verse 16.
I was looking up stuff and I just read this 2 minutes ago.
Yeah. Colossians 1:16. Verse 15. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. So, clearly talking about Jesus here. For by Him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through Him and for Him. And He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. And so you have this very clear Jesus is who's being talked about here. And what is He doing? He's the one through whom and for whom all things are created. And so He's the agent through which creation takes place. And so one of the things that you see in creation is the presence of the Trinity. And I think these are really strong passages when you talk to somebody who might be a Unitarian. There's a lot of them out there, like Jehovah's Witnesses or whoever it might be, or a lot of the holiness churches or whatever it might be, that are Unitarians. This is pretty clear that there's three persons here active in this creation event. What else does creation tell us about the nature of God? I think it tells us He's eternal. We've looked at these a little bit, but it also tells us that He's self-existent. In Exodus 3:14, you have God speaking to Moses through the burning bush. And Moses is asking all these questions. He says, well, what if they don't believe me? Well, what do I say? Who sent me? What do I do here? And God says, tell them that I am who I am, that I have sent you. And that's, Yahweh, right? He just is what He is. He's self-existent. He has no beginning. He has no end. He just is. He's not what he's not. He is what he is. God's existence isn't dependent upon anything, right? Everything in creation abides by those natural laws, right? If you stub your toe, you're going to have some pain. If you're born, you're going to die. There's all these natural laws that all of us are, amenable to, but that doesn't apply to God. God is outside of that, and so, He has no beginning. He has no end. He just is. There is nothing that caused Him to be. He just is, and that is a unique attribute of God. When you look at creation, what it says about God, it says that He's outside of nature, right? As somebody who creates space, you can't take up space. And so He's outside of the thing that He's creating. He's not, a three-dimensional being like we're three-dimensional beings, right? He's something beyond that. He's transcendent. He's spirit. So He's outside of nature. It tells us that He's timeless. If you're going to create time, then it helps to not be bound by time, right? And so His creation was in the beginning. And you have that phrase. It's used in John. It's used in Genesis. The beginning is a time marker, right? And so as time comes into being, God is there, the one who's acting on it. And so He's somebody who's not bound by time in the same way that we are. All of us age. All of us had a timeline beginning. All of us have a timeline end. God's not like that. And you get that in a lot of different passages in the Bible, right? A day is as 1,000 years to the Lord, right? That is not literal, right? In that I think days still mean days to God. But the meaning of what's being said there is, what is a day to God? It doesn't matter. What's 1,000 years to God? It's like a day. It doesn't matter. He's not bound by time. And God is a timeless being. You have to be if you're going to be a creator of time. It tells us that He's powerful. You can't just bring things into being unless you are capable to do that. People can build a lot of really cool stuff, and you can build skyscrapers, and you can build spaceships, and you can build all kinds of cool stuff. But where'd you get the dirt, right? You get that from something. God doesn't build the universe from pre-made building blocks. He makes it Himself. There's no dirt from which to build the universe. He creates from nothing, something from nothing. It has to be that way. And so He's powerful in a way that none of us are powerful. He's timeless in a way that none of us are timeless. And He's outside of nature in a way that none of us are. We are bound by nature. And it also tells us that He's personal, right? Well, why did these things come into being? That's the real philosophical question here. Well, the reason that He created is because He chose to create. There's no compelling force on God that forced His hand and made Him create us, made Him create the universe. That's not at all what happened. He chose to create, right? And you get that in Colossians. He is before all things, in Him all things hold together. Or back up a verse. All things were created through Him and for Him. That for is a purpose, right? It was created for Christ, for God. I don't know all the reasons of why He chose to create rather than not create. Probably because He wanted to show love, and you can't show love without something to show love to. But God chose to act, and so He's a personal God. Non-personal beings don't make choices. Rocks don't choose. Space dust doesn't make choices. But God chose to act. And so the big takeaway here, being, we looked at this last time, if God exists, He's ultimate in all of His attributes, everything that He is. He's the pinnacle of existence. And this week, origin, if the universe had a beginning and had a cause, it did begin, and God's the best explanation for its origin. I think that's pretty clear. We'll talk about order next week, and then morality. If moral laws exist, there must be a moral lawgiver. They do exist, and so they originate from God. Any thoughts or questions about any of this? I know this was kind of dense.
You were talking about the Trinity and the Son of God and everything, and I usually never give it much thought, but what is the meaning of Son if he's,
Yeah.
if Jesus is God? I mean, he's not.
Yeah.
Explain Son.
Well, here's the question. Was Jesus created? Careful, Santa's watching. So,
I thought that's a yes and no. Like,
yeah.
no in the fact that he's eternal in God, but yes in the born he was created.
Yeah.
that way.
So, it is Christmas Eve. So, Saint Nick, Saint Nick, it was 1600 years ago this year, he slapped a heretic named Arius because he was saying that Jesus was created, and because he was created, he's therefore lesser than God the Father. He's a created being. He's not truly eternal. And so the Son is eternal. God is eternal, and the Son is God, therefore he is eternal. There is when you talk about, obviously, there was a time where there was not a Jesus in the flesh, and so there is something added to his nature, a human nature added to the nature of God, is what I would say to that. Son refers to just kind of the relationship that you see within the Trinity. You have Father, Son, Spirit. The Father begets the Son, begat the Son, not in the sense of caused him to exist, but in the sense of they share the same nature. And then the Spirit is sent from the Father. You see that throughout the Bible. I don't know if that made any sense. Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah. Yeah. Make you scratch your head.
This is interesting. When I was in, I don't know if it was 8th or 9th grade, but we were in science class, and you can show your camera.
Yeah.